Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. Before we start, a quick explanation of the terms here. Everyone knows the 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games were postponed until 2021. However, the organisers still refer to the event as Tokyo 2020, whenever they're being held. I guess after spending all that money on marketing and merchandise, they decided it would be best to stick with the original name. So whenever I refer to Tokyo 2020, I'll be talking about information applicable to the Summer Games, whether they're held in 2020 or 2021. When it's necessary to differentiate between the original plans for 2020 and things that are changed for 2021, I'll try to make clear in the explanation. That said, let's get on with it. So here we go, 20 facts. Well, sets of facts, on Tokyo 2020. Tokyo has bid for the Summer Olympics on 5 occasions, losing twice and winning 3 times. However, the 1940 Games, which Tokyo was scheduled to host, were first relocated to Helsinki and ultimately cancelled due to the Second World War. 2020 is actually second time lucky for Tokyo, which lost its bid for the 2016 Olympics to Rio de Janeiro, despite receiving top scores in the applicant phase. Most likely, this was a result of the relatively recent Summer and Winter Games awarded to other Asian countries, and the desire to find a first-time host in a different part of the world. Tokyo beat Istanbul and Madrid to be awarded the 2020 Games. The driving force behind the failed 2016 bid and chairman of the 2020 bid was Tokyo's populist former governor Shintaro Ishihara. A celebrity author turned politician, Ishihara was infamous for making nationalistic statements and insensitive comments about women, old people, non-Japanese, and even the French language. Naturally, he also blamed immigrants for crime, completely ignoring the statistics. I knew individuals working on the Olympic bids who were terrified each time Ishihara went in front of a camera, lest he say something offensive to torpedo Tokyo's chances. However, it's probably fair to say that Tokyo's loss for 2016 and victory for 2020 happened despite anything Ishihara said, rather than because of it. Tokyo 2020 is the second time Tokyo has hosted both the Summer Olympics and Paralympic Games, following the 1964 Games. The 1964 Olympics were the first hosted by an Asian city. They were seen by many as a major milestone in modern Japanese history, and symbolic of Japan's re-emergence as a respected member of the international community after the shame and devastation of the Second World War. They were a chance to showcase Japanese technology, such as the Shinkansen bullet trains, that started operation the week before the Games opened. They also spurred infrastructure development in Tokyo. Japan is a country where, for the most part, the streets have no names. But many of the streets in Tokyo which do have names owe them to the 1964 Olympics. Tokyo 2020 makes Tokyo the first Asian city to host the Games on 2 separate occasions. In fact, counting the 1972 and 1998 Winter Games, it's the 4th Olympics held in Japan. It's also the second of 3 consecutive Olympics held in Asia, sandwiched between the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, Korea, and the 2022 Winter Games in and around Beijing, China. On a less positive note, the rescheduling of the 2020 Games makes Tokyo the only city to be awarded the Games and not hold them as scheduled on 2 separate occasions, following the cancellation of the 1940 Games. It is the first postponement of the Games in modern Olympic history. Tokyo 2020 is officially the Games of the 32nd Olympiad, the 32nd official International Olympic Committee recognised Games, since the first modern games were held in Athens in 1896. The Summer Games have been held every 4 years since 1896, with the exception of an 8-year gap due to World War I and a 12-year gap for the Second World War, and now the 5-year gap before the 2021 rescheduling. The 2020 Summer Olympics are held from July 23rd to August 8th, 2021, in the peak of Japan's very hot and humid summer, potentially making things very uncomfortable for athletes and visitors alike. The 1964 Games were, quite sensibly, held in October in order to avoid the worst of the summer heat and the typhoon season in September. While modern technology and architectural design should theoretically help to alleviate some of the heat, the wisdom of this scheduling remains in doubt. 33 sports are featured at the Summer Games, including 5 new ones, although baseball and softball are in fact being reintroduced and aren't actually new. The other new sports are karate, skateboarding, sport climbing, and surfing. There are a total of 339 events. This compares to a mere 43 events in the 1896 Athens Games. Besides the new sports, this also includes new events in existing Olympic sports, such as freestyle BMX in the sport of cycling and 3-on-3 basketball. The number of events hasn't been scaled down for the 2021 rescheduling, and 11,000 athletes were expected to attend. The Paralympics are held from August 24th to September 5th, featuring 539 events in 22 sports. They will be the 16th Summer Paralympics, and the second held in Tokyo after the 1964 Games, and they are seen as an opportunity to promote accessibility in the city, particularly on its transportation network and crowded streets. The Rugby World Cup, held in Japan in 2019, was seen as something of a dry run for the Olympics. Although 3 matches had to be cancelled due to a typhoon, the first cancellations in the history of the Rugby World Cup, the tournament was generally viewed as a great success. The Games' vision includes the 3 core concepts of achieving personal best, unity in diversity, and connecting to tomorrow. The Games' motto is Unified by Emotion. The Summer Games mascot, Mirai Toa's name is, according to the official website, based on the Japanese words Mirai, meaning future, and Toa, meaning eternity, and represents the wish that through the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, a future of everlasting hope will carry on in the hearts of everyone around the world. Meanwhile, his Paralympic counterpart, Someiti's name, is derived from Someyoshino, a popular type of cherry blossom, and the phrase "so mighty," and is meant to represent Paralympic athletes who overcome obstacles and redefine the boundaries of possibility. Following the precedent of the Rio Olympics, the approximately 5,000 medals for the Summer and Paralympic Games were produced from material from recycled mobile phones and other small electronic devices, donated by people from all over Japan. As all Olympic medals, they depict the Greek goddess of victory Nike in front of the Panathinaik Stadium, along with the 5-ring Olympic symbol and the official name of the Games. They are supposed to have been designed to resemble rough stones that have been polished and which now shine with light and brilliance. The gold medal isn't actually gold, and is made from gold plating on pure silver. The Olympic torch relay started in Fukushima, a region hit by the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, and still suffering from the effects of this and the subsequent nuclear crisis. The torch arrived in Japan in 2020 and was kept burning an entire year. The football training ground that the so-called Torch of Recovery set off from was an emergency response headquarters during the nuclear crisis. And the torch itself, which has a cherry blossom motif in cross-section, is partly made from material from prefabricated buildings used to house those affected by the disaster. While 2020 is unlikely to have the same kind of impact on Japan as the '64 Olympics, some are referring to them as the Recovery Games, and see them as symbolic of the nation's rebuilding after these catastrophic events. Now, with current events, organisers are seeing the Games as much more than this, and they hope they can be symbolic of a global recovery from the difficult days of 2020. However, parts of the torch relay had to be altered due to health concerns in some parts of Japan. The Games were planned to be compact, with 85% of the events taking place within 8 kilometers of the Olympic Village, although subsequent changes mean this figure has fallen to around 60%. They were also sold as an environmentally friendly Games, making use of Japan's advanced environmental technology, as well as a mix of existing facilities and infrastructure and new temporary facilities to reduce environmental impact. As already mentioned, the medals were made from recycled materials. The podiums too are made from recycled plastics, and the Games are committed to the use of sustainable timber. A final selling point touts the Games as the most innovative in history, making use of Japanese technology such as human support robots to assist visitors and spectators, and field support robots to assist in the operations of the events themselves. The Olympic venues are separated into 3 zones: the Heritage Zone in central Tokyo, incorporating venues used in the 1964 Games; the Tokyo Bay Zone, on reclaimed land by the waterfront, an area of new development seen as representing the future of Tokyo; and a third zone that includes events held in other parts of Japan, such as football matches and the marathons. The Japan National Stadium in the Heritage Zone is a new structure built on the site of the 1964 Olympic Stadium, and will host the opening and closing ceremonies. Most of the traditional track and field events will be held in this zone. As befitting its waterfront location, the Tokyo Bay Zone will be home to outdoor aquatic events and beach volleyball, but also swimming, tennis, and BMX among other sports. Original estimates for the Games called for a budget of 700 billion yen, but by 2019 that amount had already risen to 1.35 trillion yen, or about $12.5 billion US. Rescheduling presented a unique set of problems for organisers, as temporary facilities that were never intended to stay up after the summer of 2020 had to be maintained. Arrangements had to be made for facilities and land that had already been sold off for use after the Games, and also for housing for Olympic athletes that had been sold for residential use. Fortunately, all 68 of Japan's domestic sponsors for the Games agreed to an extension of their contracts. After rescheduling, version 5 of the Olympic budget, announced in December 2020, called for $15.4 billion US. However, the final price tag is really still unknown, particularly when the costs of providing security for the Games and health measures have not yet been determined. When this is balanced with the loss of ticket revenue from spectators and loss of revenue resulting from banning foreign visitors, the financial picture for the Games doesn't look so bright. 80,000 volunteers, or field cast, were planned to assist athletes and visitors at the Games in 2020. These volunteers were selected from applications from over 200,000 people worldwide. volunteers would have helped provide support in spectator services and competition and media operation, doing everything from guiding spectators and assisting in security checks, to driving participants and medical staff to and fro, and guiding athletes to their positions for medal ceremonies. In addition to this, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government recruited another 30,000 volunteers to assist visitors at airports, stations, and major tourist spots around the city. How many volunteers would be required and show up for the 2021 Games was unclear. With no foreign visitors and the decision not to allow domestic spectators at Tokyo venues, it's clear that far fewer volunteers will be needed. Ticket prices ranged from 2,500 yen to 130,000 yen for sporting events, and from 12,000 yen to 300,000 yen for the opening and closing ceremonies. Half of all tickets were to be sold at 8,000 yen or less. That's $73. For residents of Japan, tickets were initially sold through a lottery system, and remaining tickets on a first-come, first-served basis. For those outside Japan, tickets were purchased from the respective National Olympic Committee or authorised resellers. Tickets purchased for 2020 were initially supposed to be valid for rescheduled events in 2021, with refunds offered for those who couldn't reschedule. However, with foreign visitors not permitted, all overseas ticket holders should now be due a refund, as will domestic fans who had purchased tickets to the now spectator-free Tokyo-based events. In 2020, despite worries over the weather, relocation of some events outside Tokyo, a rising budget, and questions about Russia's participation, the problems for Tokyo paled in comparison to those faced by the Rio de Janeiro Olympics and most other big sporting events. Facilities were good to go. Earthquakes had been drilled for. 3 of Japan's national holidays had been rescheduled to accommodate the Olympics and reduce congestion. And even elementary school kids were brushing up on their knowledge of Olympic English. Meanwhile, Tokyo's excellent infrastructure and world-renowned public safety would have helped to ensure a safe and smooth Games. In fact, in early 2020, IOC chief Thomas Bach said the city was the best prepared host city he had ever seen, and everything looked ready for the 2020 Games and the 10 million visitors that were expected to descend on the city for the experience. Then 2020 happened. Compared to many other nations, Japan suffered far less from the events of 2020, but the problem hasn't gone away. One issue that is of particular concern is Japan's tardiness in approving and rolling out vaccinations, which means herd immunity is far from achieved. Public support for holding the Games has also plummeted over the last year, with as many as 70 to 80% of Japanese people saying the Games should have been postponed again or cancelled. With Olympic organisers also holding off on making many decisions until as late as possible in order to react to the changing situation, this created an air of uncertainty about the Games. But the powers that be were adamant that the Games would go ahead, and go ahead they did, albeit with no foreign visitors or spectators at Tokyo events. Thanks for listening to the end. Yeah, I know there were a lot more than 20 facts packed in there, but 20 for 2020 sounded good. If you'd like a more detailed look at Tokyo and what it has to offer visitors, or you're interested in more in-depth videos on Japan and Japanese culture, please check back for future videos. And if you have any suggestions for anything Japan related you'd like me to look at in future videos, please feel free to leave suggestions below.